You're listening to the Valley Labor Report with David Story and Jacob Morrison.
We've got Chris Brooks on the line. He is a labor journalist from Chattanooga, Tennessee, and a graduate of the Labor Studies program at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. He currently works as a staff writer at Labor Notes and has bylines at The Intercept, Jacobin Magazine, and many more. He is a member of the National Writers Union, UAW Local 1981. Welcome to the program, Chris. We're really excited to have you. So thanks for giving us your time this morning. I really appreciate it.
No, it's an absolute honor to be on the program with y'all. You know, I think programs like the Valley Labor Report are so essential when we're just inundated with corporate media all the time. So to be on a part of a program that represents the voice of labor, I couldn't be any happier.
Well, I appreciate you saying that, brother. It means a lot. So I'd like to start by just talking about kind of how rare it is for somebody from Eastern Tennessee to be writing about labor issues. I assume your involvement with the Tennessee Education Association brought you into that work. Can you speak a little bit about what brought you to where you are now as a very prominent labor journalist, might I add?
Well, I'm never bashful to tell folks that organizing saved my life, and I really mean that. In 2007, I was graduating from the University of Tennessee at Knoxville. In my last semester there, my mom had contracted breast cancer, and she had a mastectomy. And while she was in the hospital, she contracted MRSA, which is a penicillin-resistant staph infection, and she was in the surgical intensive care unit for several weeks on end. I ended up moving home to help take care of her, and she ended up having to file for medical bankruptcy like so many Americans do across the country, even though she had health insurance. Just the bills, like she came out with hundreds of thousands of dollars in bills. And at that time, I was working at CSL Plasma, which I always describe as a literal blood-sucking corporation. It's a place where you go in and, you're like your working class person from the street, and they take the plasma out of your arm and give you $50 and push you out the door. It was a really exploitative workplace. About half the people who worked there were part of the federal reentry program, living in a halfway house. The company received a grant in order for, people who are transitioning back into society from prison to work there. And they were all fantastic, but because they were in this really precarious situation, management was really terrible to them. And so 1 year and 1 day after, having worked there, I had my 1 year review, flying colors. I was a stellar employee. I saw a bunch of my coworkers getting picked on by management, and I didn't know what I was doing, but I went around and was like, hey guys, I think we need a union in here. I got them all interested, and it was like, okay, well, I'm going to go home and call some. I went home and called through the phone book, like every union that was in there to try to get a hold of somebody, never got a hold of anyone. And when I went back in the next day, I was summarily fired. And, for me, I think I just became desperate to learn how to organize. Like it was out of this real need of just seeing the devastation of the 2007 and 2008 Great Recession, how medical bankruptcies were racking everyone, how the lack of insurance is hitting everyone, how everybody's exploited at work. And I'm just filled with anger. Like I'm somebody who organizes from a place of rage and anger. And I think that the worst thing in the world is not taking a punch. It's feeling like you can't punch back. It's that feeling of futility. And so for me, I know that having collective solutions to our problems far outweighs having an individual impulse to act on that. Right. So I think that's what we're seeing in the streets right now in response to the murder of George Floyd, is people that are angry because there aren't collective solutions being proposed. And so I really think that, I could have gone to jail or something. I was just so angry at the world, but I learned how to organize instead. And that was community organizing with public housing and Section 8 housing tenants. And then labor organizing, which I think is just absolutely crucial, and went on to work with the Tennessee Education Association for a number of years, and then getting involved with Labor Notes and other unions all around the country and the world. I'm a strong believer that organizing is the solution.
Yeah, that's fascinating, and that really resonates with me as well. My journey to the labor movement began something like that. As far as the I felt like what I was doing was futile. I was involved in electoral work for years in college. I knocked on thousands of doors for Democrats, made thousands of phone calls, and in 2018, 70 seats in Alabama went from Democrat to Republican. And I was like, oh, I haven't made a single person's life better. And it was just this overwhelming sense of futility. And the labor movement has, to me, been so empowering for myself, and empowering to be able to impart that sense of empowerment to other people who have always thought that maybe the solutions were different politicians, or they had to hope that the boss was graceful or something, and being able to really impart that sense of empowerment to other people has been really, really gratifying for me. So we both read a lot of your work, being a subscriber to several of the publications that you write for, including In These Times and Labor Notes. And one of the things that we picked up on in your writing is that you seem to be a very militant unionist that follows kind of along the Chomsky line of questioning authority, Noam Chomsky. Is that just us reading into that? And if it's true, could you expand on that a little bit? It's something that we feel is a very integral part of being Southern, anti-authoritarian with a strong distaste for, those willing to just accept the corporate status quo. So if you could kind of talk about your motivating ideology and what influences you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So a lot like, the story that you just told, I think is so representative of how so many of us feel, right? Like powerless, to just be beholden to the decisions made by other people in our lives, whether it's the politicians or the boss at work. I really think that the labor movement is the single greatest force for democracy in the history of the United States. And I think that the labor movement is most likely to be successful when it's militant and when it's progressive and when it's democratic. And what I mean by democratic is that unions are owned and run by the rank and file themselves, right? Unfortunately, too many unions over the years have really tried to take shortcuts and partner with the boss, or tried to play nice with anti-worker and racist politicians like Trump. Some of them are even more concerned about controlling their own workers, their own members, than with fighting the company. And I know that's part of the story of labor's decline as well. I mean, obviously the companies, corporate power is, the corporations, modern corporation is the single greatest threat to the planet, and also the single greatest enemy that the public, working people have ever had. It's so powerful. It's really hard to underestimate it. Or overestimate it. But part of it also is that labor unions have been unwilling to take on those fights. And I think the places where we see them being the most successful is the places where they're willing to put it on the line. So you think about like the last recession that we went through in 2008, so many unions wanted to put their heads down. They wanted to not rock the boat. They were just hoping to slide by and escape notice. And the unions that really, I think, are revitalizing the labor movement right now, like the Chicago Teachers Union, they engaged in this massive strike in 2012, at a time when most liberals around the country were blaming, public sector unions and teachers unions specifically for the woes in society. The Chicago teachers said, absolutely not. We're fighting on behalf of public schools, the schools that our students deserve. And we're willing to go out on strike to disrupt society, right? To inconvenience everyone in order to draw attention to who the real culprits are, right? Which are the rich and the wealthy, which are continuing to steal our labor, continuing to take, our collective wealth to move it outside of the schools, to gut public services. And because they did that, they became a rallying point in this country. And now we're seeing this just continue to snowball to today, with West Virginia teachers going out on strike, with Oklahoma teachers, with Kentucky teachers, Arizona teachers, Los Angeles, so it's been really incredible to see that this theory is true, right? That like labor is at its best when it's willing to fight, when it's willing to have big, bold demands that people can rally behind, and when the workers themselves are at the forefront of leading the charge.
Yeah. Hey, Chris, this is David. That was one of my questions that I kind of threw in there, was surrounding that Chomsky quote. And it's something that I've talked with Jacob a lot about, and being the president of my union here in Decatur, I constantly tell our members that do not cede your power to the authority that is, the higher international or even at the district level, because at the end of the day, it is the workers that's going to make the difference. And I think that that's kind of, it is representative of everything that we're doing in, not just in the union, but in politics in general, to where so many people has gotten so apathetic, and they're so, I guess they don't see, they're willing to let somebody else handle their issues for them instead of taking it to the streets, kind of like what we're seeing right now, and where it started in Minnesota, but across the board as well. And I think that's just an integral part of being in organized labor is demanding those concessions ourselves and not relying on implied authority figure to come in and do it for you.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I mean, right now we're about to go into the most significant budget crises the country has ever seen. And we know what's going to happen. Employers are going to come to the table and they're going to be demanding concessions, even if they don't need them. They're going to be emboldened in this moment to try to take more and more from us. And the only way we're going to be able to fight back successfully is if the rank and file gets directly involved in doing the kinds of things that are going to be needed to put leverage on these companies to shut them down, so we've really got to get out of this mindset that, I pay dues to a union to provide services to me, and to say that like dues is how we organize our resources, right? Like we are an organization of people who come together to fight for ourselves, right? And we have a vision of what that means. And that means redistributing the wealth in this society. We live in a country where 400 people have $2.96 trillion, more than the bottom 60% of the American public combined in 400 households. That is outrageous. That concentration of wealth and power is stupendous, and is part of the problems of why so many people are unemployed right now, of why so many people are doing without. And labor should be at the forefront of calling out the moral outrage of that and then providing solutions to fight for and getting people in the act of it.
Thanks for listening, folks. If you want to keep up with us throughout the week, you can follow us online. We've got a Facebook page, facebook.com/Valley Labor Report. You can search us on YouTube at The Valley Labor Report. We're on Twitter at Labor Reporters. I'm on Twitter at JacobM_AL. David is on Twitter at Radical Unionist, RADICL Unionist. If you appreciate our work and want to ensure that we can stay on the air, consider supporting us with a monthly donation on Patreon at patreon.com/The Valley Labor Report.